It's Friday, January 30th, 2015. I'm Jimmy Principe.
And I'm Trey Comstock. Put in your final orders because this is Tech's Last Call, episode 105. Your last call for Tech News of the Week tonight. Jimmy smashes a drone into the White House for better broadband, and I make a lot of money trying to understand Twitter. But we start tonight with the staggering amount of money that can be made on overpriced phones. How much money do you make when you sell 34,000 iPads every day for 3 months? iPhones. Every day for 3 months. The answer to this question is that Apple made $18 billion. That's made in, income made $18 billion, or more than any company has ever made in a single quarter, on the back of $75 billion in revenue. 69% of that money was made off of the sale of iPhones. Oh yeah, they also made $3.06 per share. All of this is borderline crazy. The New York Times describes it as hard to get your head around. They sold a record of close to 75 million iPhones, beating its previous record quarter by over 23 million iPhones. They also sold 5.5 million Macintoshes, which is up 14% in an era where the PC is dead. They also sold 21.7 million iPads, which is down 17%. This is the only muted note. Now, they expected it to be down actually around this much. And in the midst of crazy growth, it's worth asking, why does anyone care? Tim Cook said in the earnings call that the iPad will eventually be a growth sector in the long run, but will continue to decline in the short run. Unless they merge it with the Mac, I don't see how. People don't replace them as fast as phones and don't need them like phones or PCs. Still, Wall Street loved all of it, and Apple's stock rose 5%, giving them a market capitalization of $683 billion, making them the most valuable company in the world. Okay, Jimmy. With increasing iPhone sales, increasing Mac revenues, and decreasing iPad sales, can Apple keep this growth really going? I mean, it's staggering. It's crazy. It's kind of beautiful in a way to think that Microsoft's valuation is now half that of Apple, where less than 20 years ago it was almost the exact reverse with Microsoft being worth $620 billion at the time. Now, with inflation, that $620 billion's more, but whatever.
That was also when they owned the world.
Right. Well, that was the Windows 95 era where they literally owned the world. Can Apple keep this going?
So I think that what we're seeing is there was a massive pent-up demand for larger iPhones.
Yes.
People were like, oh, well, I have a 4, and there's not enough better with the iPhone 5, and I don't really see a reason to upgrade. And so you had people that, because Apple, makes quality hardware, that were on iPhone 4s or iPhone 4Ss, that were like, oh, I don't really need to upgrade to a 5S. It's not that much different, and this works great, and why do I need that? But I've talked with these people, it's really the people whose parents got iPhones, because the 4S was kind of the generation when everyone's parents got iPhones, when the iPhone became completely ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And so those people don't want to upgrade as much. My mom being one of them. Well, when the iPhone 6 came out, finally there was and the 6 Plus, but more the 6, there was finally enough difference between the new iPhone and what they had that it made sense to upgrade. It had the rounded edges, it had the kind of matte anodization on the metal. All around just a really nice product. And so they were able to move some serious some serious product. However, the other thing to note is I don't think that Samsung lost significant like sales of their high-end smartphones.
Yeah,
They got killed in the low end, which is a different story. But their high end was a significant amount of their sales as well. So this is either
Samsung
an overall
lost market share this quarter, and Apple grew market share this quarter. They are either neck and neck, or Apple is slightly ahead, or Samsung is slightly ahead. But they basically, as Samsung has seemed to kind of peak and is on a downturn, Apple, which, many people thought would just start slipping slowly away, has done the exact opposite and has found a way to charge and continue to grow, and actually grew its market share quarter over quarter.
Right. And so I think that, but I do think that a lot of this was driven on people upgrading, because you had people with 4S, 5, and 5S upgrading. Which is
theoretically the 5S. Most of the 5S folks were not upgrading.
Well, yeah, but the 5S folks that upgraded are the same people that were the 5 folks that upgraded last year, and that's onwards back into oblivion.
But that's not the significant number, because those are the people who are buying it on the off-contract price, which isn't most people.
Right, but so the point is that no, I don't think that we can expect to see another $18 billion quarter from them this quarter, because Christmas. But I think that this is definitely,
no one expects Q1 to be the same as Q4.
Right.
That's not really the question.
I don't think that Q4 next year will be this good. As far as for iPhones specifically. Now,
but
I think that if you abstract it out, though, they moved more Macs, which means what it really means is that Steve Jobs' vision of getting people into the store with the iPod to sell Macintoshes is now working with the iPhone to sell Macs. So in the same way that the iPod worked. So I think that what you're seeing is that people are excited about Apple as a brand in a way that they haven't been in the previous year. And I think that if you really push changes, because the laptops are the things, other than the Retinas, the kind of consumer grade laptops that Apple sells in that $1,000 to $1,500 range haven't changed all that much in the last 5 years.
No, let me think.
Other than the Air hasn't changed that much.
No.
The Air hasn't changed that much. The price point came down.
The Pros that have changed a lot in the last 5 years.
Well, but they still offer the Classic Pro, I think.
Yeah, but that's not what's selling. What's selling is the 2 Retina Pros.
Right, but I think that my point is that the Airs are still moving, and
they're great laptops.
Retinas are still moving. But I think that the only thing that'll make you get excited about Apple again this year is the Apple Watch, which is going to be big. One way or another, it's going to be big, whether that's a good big or a bad big, or it's going to be Macs. And I think that this year is the year for Apple to really revitalize that. The MacBook Air line, because
certainly that's the rumor, right? The rumor is that we'll get the 12-inch MacBook Air,
right? Well,
very much like the 13-inch Dell XPS.
Right. I think that it'll be very similar to the Dell 13-inch, where it's just a smaller form factor, but still a 13-inch screen. And you'll get the 11, where you'll have a smaller form factor, because the 11 has a huge bezel around the edges. Now, some of that is because of the keyboard. If you make it too small, then the keyboard starts becoming impractical.
Right, that's why we're saying a 12-inch. So it's basically, literally the form factor of the Surface Pro 3. So that's a 12-inch device, not quite a 13-inch. It's bigger, has a bigger screen than the 11-inch Air. And has very little bezel. And this being Apple, and Dell's proven you can do it, they'll eliminate the bezel. It'll be all screen when you open up the lid. But it'll have a slightly bigger keyboard than the current 11-inch MacBook Air, which for me was perfectly fine, but I understand for a lot of folks it's a deal breaker.
Well, it'll be more like their Pro line.
Right. Now, what's interesting is Tim Cook's saying that we think iPad's going to be growth in the long run.
Well, he's just going to take it in the pants for a while.
No, I wonder if he is really talking about the iPad Pro. Right? And in my comments, I say, unless you start to merge iPad and Mac. because really those are becoming one section in Apple's head. Certainly, it's the thing you carry around in your pocket versus the thing you get work done on. Right. That's really seems, and certainly in Apple's marketing, that's the distinction. Right. You get work done on iPads and MacBooks, which is where the money is, and obviously iMacs and Mac Pros.
Right, and I do think that there is they have such a large app library for the iPad, and not only that, they also have the ability, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, through the Mac App Store, you can run, what is it? You can run iPad apps and iPhone apps on your Macintosh.
I've never seen that, but
I think something
they
like that. They
certainly have a virtual, for testing and stuff. I know they have a virtualization environment.
Maybe I'm thinking of the BlueStacks or whatever for Android. But either way, there are
BlueStacks
ways
for Android you can run on Android apps on a PC. Absolutely.
Right. But either way, I would not count them out for trying to do a Surface Pro 3 type model, because apparently the Surface Pro 3 has been successful.
Yeah. So Microsoft made money and then lost value. The company in Redmond had revenue of $26 billion, income of over $7 billion, and made 71 cents a share. Revenue from Surface was up 24% to $1.1 billion. It's a billion-dollar business.
Look at
They
that.
moved over 10 million Lumia phones, gaining revenue of $2.3 billion, or roughly 10% of the company.
Wow.
They even sold
That's a lot of Lumia phones.
Yeah, well, it's mostly in the low end. They even sold
So.
6.6. Okay, so put that in perspective. So the average iPhone sells at they're making $680 per phone. The average Android, they're making $300 per phone. My bet is you are making less than that on your average Lumia.
Oh, you're
phone.
probably making it, between $120 and $200
A phone.
a phone.
So they even moved 6.6 million Xboxes. Commercial cloud, that's Azure, Office 365 for business, etc., grew 117% to an annual rate of 5.5 as a $5.5 billion business.
Let's talk about mobile first cloud first.
Yeah. Well, the numbers bear this out. This is becoming more important as revenues from sales of Windows to OEMs was down 13%. Which they attribute to cheaper Windows licensing, which is true, but the need for cheaper licensing is driven by iPads, the dominance of the Mac on the high-end consumer market, and iPads. Oh, and Chromebooks.
And iPads.
And iPads. None of this was enough for Wall Street. Microsoft shares fell by close to 10% because of weak growth projections of only about 5%. So you just can't please them. Is there a silver lining in all of this for Microsoft?
Yeah, there totally is. I mean, you look at Azure, they're the backbone, and Azure and Office 365 for business, which are their two big money making things,
or
because
money making potential things. They're not currently the big cash cow. I mean, even if they are, 5.5 billion, that's less than half of the commercial side of the business.
Right. But you start looking at that, and you look at Surface is up 25% this year.
That's easy to do from the depths that they came from.
Well, right. But when looking at Microsoft, the thing that you have to remember is you can't just make leaps and bounds in a day. Ironically, Microsoft is playing as an underdog in some of these markets, like Surface.
Almost all of these markets we're talking about. And that's part of their problem. They're also, in some ways, the underdog with Azure, right? Because that's AWS, and even Google is a more established player in that market.
Right, but they can offer, on the business end, which this is like commercial cloud, that they are stronger in that sector than either Google or AWS. AWS is trying to eat into Windows Server in those applications, right, and implementations by IBM and such. So I think that in that one sector of the market, they are not playing from behind. But in the consumer sector of the market, where people think of them as that annoying software that runs on my computer, that background of life that is Windows, then they're really struggling. Like, oh, what is this Windows Phone thing? What is this Surface? Now, they've won. I know of people that I've talked to that have interacted with the Surface, love it.
Sure. Yeah, I even see them on airplanes. I see them in college classes. You know, I see more. I'm usually when I'm out using my Surface, I'm not the only one, which is surprising to me.
And the thing that I've heard about Surface, and one of the reasons why businesses in a big way have been working on implementing them, is because, and I think it was my dad that told me this. What it is that because most of the licensing agreements with HP and Dell and Lenovo are, if you do not have a comparable product, we can go find something and you can offer us a comparable product for the same price. No one has a comparable Surface Pro 3 product. No one. They don't have anything that does it exactly the way that the Surface does. Right. And so as a result of that, these companies are able to go to Microsoft directly and say, hey, we need however many Surfaces without having to worry about Dell or HP or Lenovo.
I think on a more personal level, I'm encouraged by these numbers because it seems that in Satya Nadella's Microsoft, if it's not making money, it doesn't last very long.
That's true.
And the fact that they're moved a lot of Xboxes and a lot of Surfaces, two products that I'm attached to, that's encouraging on a level. It makes Surface especially look less like a boondoggle and more like a business. And I think some of that is on the back of just how good Surface Pro 3 is. Right? I mean, Surface Pro 3, our device of the year for 2014, is
by far. There's nothing else.
Right. I mean, this was in some ways the easiest decision we made. I hate myself for it, but we made that decision. It's a phenomenal product, and I think it's only going to get better if you look at what it'll be with the latest generation of Intel chips. Just how much battery life they're going to be able to eke out of that thing. Odds are something like 15 hours of battery life from the upcoming Surface Pro 4, which has not been announced in any way, but let's assume they're doing it.
But they've done it every year since they started it, so
right.
Odds are they're going to do it again.
Right, and as successful as this is, I think with the announcement of the Surface Hub, they're definitely doubling down on Surface as a brand. So you can definitely anticipate a Surface Pro 4. I don't know what they'll call it, but sure. The question really is it going to launch in the summer time frame or launch alongside Windows 10 as did the original Surface?
I think it'll launch alongside Windows 10 because that device is going to show off the tablet. The fact that Windows 10 can flip between the two different modes of being a tablet and being a desktop device.
Which is certainly one of their big value propositions. But you got to wonder, in the long run, if Microsoft can stay. Obviously, I think they're going to stay a company. And certainly, I think they're going to stay an interesting company. Because the stuff that's on the cutting edge of Microsoft, whether it be Azure or HoloLens or their devices stuff, I think all of that is really interesting. In a way that Apple's cutting edge currently is not. But I don't see how they stay as big a company as they even are now. Now, they're down. They're half the company they were 20 years ago in terms of market cap, which is frightening if you take into effect inflation. And that's as that PC market becomes a different thing. And I think one of the reasons why Wall Street's bearish on them is exactly that. Still, fundamentally, even if you think about it, so consumer software, or consumer, what they break it out, consumer and commercial. So let's look in consumer, because that's the side I really understand. Surface was $1.1 billion. Phone was $2.3 billion. Total was like $12.9 billion. Windows to OEMs, although down 13%, still makes up a sizable chunk of that. So even if you have like 100% growth in Surfaces, you're still not replacing what you're going to lose as Windows becomes less relevant in terms of revenue.
And the other thing is that they are... So the difference between Apple and Microsoft at this juncture is that Apple is able to keep growing, or even less than growing, keep all the numbers at a level because they're able to release a new device every year. Now, sometimes that device is a form factor change. Sometimes that device is a hardware change, like an actual internal change. But they release a new device every year, which is something that all of the OEMs do. They all release new devices every year. However, Microsoft cannot release a new version of Windows every single year.
Well, no,
it's just not palatable.
No, but at this point, that's basically what you're signing on for Windows 10. Now, that's one of the subtexts from last week's announcement, is that you're signing on for this kind of continuous upgrade cycle, a la the Macintosh.
Right, but the thing with the Macintosh is that, in general, every iteration are small changes.
Service packs.
Which,
now they're free, and they're even treated like service packs.
Right, which is what Microsoft is going to do with Windows 10. It's just going to be a bunch of service packs. And yeah, there will be announcements relating to that, but that's one of the reasons why Microsoft is not as sexy of a company as Apple is.
Yeah, but at this point, Apple's growth doesn't really make sense to me. And again, a lot of
at this point, I don't see how they can keep
China.
growing.
Some of it's China. So let's be clear. They sold almost as many iPhones in China as they did in the United States this quarter, and that's the first time it's ever been like that.
That's
so
because they built it. They literally built the phones for China.
Right. Well,
that happened to work in the United States.
Well, they're big and they're gold, which is what China wants, apparently, is big phones that are gold. And that's why you see it trending that way. China loves gold stuff.
And they're on the right
bands and all
the right bands, but they also had the right deals with the Chinese carriers this year. So they all launched in China when they launched in the United States, which is, I think this is the second time.
They didn't, remember? They were slightly
that's right.
delayed. But
they were supposed to.
Right, but they didn't. But either way, within that quarter, it did. So it's reflected in the quarter. It's just not reflected in the launch day numbers. So, I mean, some of what's driving Apple's growth is that they're finally in the Chinese market, and that's only going to happen once. So if you take that out, and consider they're going to continue selling in China, Apple has not released a meaningful new product since the iPad, right? And as iPad sales crest, and are now on the decline, they're in that position where they need the new product that's a hit. And so there's actually a lot weighing on the Apple Watch. Not in terms of numbers for this year. I think the iPhone 6 and then this year's iPhone 6s are going to do real well. They're great phones. Apple's making great products and selling a ton of them globally, establishing themselves as this like global brand. I mean, they're like a really popular gift among the Chinese elite. Like, there's a lot going for Apple, but that's not going to last forever. And this New York Times article I read was comparing Microsoft in the 90s to Apple of now. And they have one thing in common, and that is that they are basically reliant on one product. Microsoft in the 90s was reliant on Windows. Apple of 2010 and on is reliant on the iPhone. Remember, 69% of these record revenues are on iPhone. So what happens as that starts to decline? And right now, we sit here, just as we did in the 90s with Microsoft, and go, that ain't going to happen. iPhone's killing it. People need smartphones, just like we all thought, oh, Microsoft's killing it. People need an operating system. But markets evolve in ways we don't expect them to. And what Apple's been so good at up until this point is that they've been able to pivot as the market pivots, or actually cause the pivot, right? So
right,
iPods
with iTunes. I think that's the important thing to point out.
Right. So then, as that was just starting to crest, iPhone, and that ate the iPod alive. They didn't care because now they're selling 75 million iPhones, and then there was iPads, and then there was big iPhones, which are now cannibalizing some of the iPads. So they
don't care.
And they don't care. But they've been able to catch that crest and keep going. The Apple Watch is that next chance to catch that crest. Right now they're keeping going. And if you can add the Apple Watch and have it keep the growth going, great. But there's rumors this week that the battery life isn't where they want it to be. And if the battery life isn't where they want that device to be, that thing's going to tank. Because
it's too expensive not to last for a full day.
Well, it's too expensive not to be perfect. Right, if you're going to be charging $500 for the one everyone wants, which is the prediction, They say starting at $350, but that's not the one you want. That's the stainless steel one. Well, that's the aluminum or whatever. That's the material you don't want, the aluminum one. For the stainless steel one, the one you really want, it's $500 minimum. So if that you're going to be charging that much, that thing needs to be perfect. And it's a way, like, the processor apparently is on par with that in, like, the iPad 2. So it sounds like it took a pretty big battery to power the iPad 2. So it makes you wonder what that battery life's really going to be. And if this can be what drives that growth, or they could end up like Microsoft is. And I just don't see Microsoft maintaining its current position either, unless Windows 10 really blows up in a way that, I want it to. I like it. I like them as a company, and I like their products.
Well, I think that Microsoft is pivoting to become still relevant to consumers, but they're pivoting to very much the corporate focused
you could have said that
back
at any
end
point in their history,
right? But also with Azure, the back end for things, especially with offering a terabyte of OneDrive storage.
No, it's unlimited now.
Is it unlimited?
Unlimited OneDrive storage with Office 365.
Well, I know where all my movies are going.
Right. No, exactly.
So apparently, this is something I learned from my brother. Apparently, OneDrive is set up to stream videos to the Xbox One.
Interesting.
So you can, if you have something in OneDrive, you can stream it to the Xbox One.
Huh. That's cool.
In real time.
So you
don't have to download the whole thing.
So you're going to need some broadband to do that.
You're going to need some broadband to do that. And this week, the FCC took a major step toward advancing true high-speed internet in the United States by redefining the term broadband from a paltry 4 megabit per second to a more reasonable 25 megabit per second. The other thing to note is that this was changed in 2010 from 200 kilobits per second to 4 megabits per second.
200K is what I had in like 97.
I know, we've come a long way.
Have we?
Well, it's a longer way than we thought we did. According to a statement by Chairman Wheeler, the previous definition of 4 megabits per second would require a typical family to take turns using the internet. And that, quote, in 2015, taking turns to share the internet bandwidth is as absurd as taking turns to use the electricity, end quote. So what does that really mean for, like, things? Well, instead of 6.3% of U.S. households not having access to broadband under the old definition of 4 megabits per second, an additional 13.1% will not have access under the new regulations. So, like, for example, you,
I no
Trey,
longer have broadband at one of my residences.
Yeah, in your country home, you no longer have broadband. This, of course, will not sit well with the ISPs who, through the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, submitted their complaints to the FCC on changing the standard last week, stating that the supporters, quote, dramatically exaggerate the amount of bandwidth needed by the typical broadband user, end quote. So, Trey, do you really think that this is going to be a change that'll help drive further expansion of broadband to real America?
Well, I don't know, because I'm not sure how much the definitions really help us when what's needed at this point is to either drop more different cable or install more nodes. So this isn't...
Well, there is an interesting... Here, I'll pull it up. You keep going.
Because at this point, most if not all DSL doesn't qualify. Right? So if you're and now most, if not all satellite.
All DSL does not qualify. Verizon currently has the fastest DSL available, and it's 15 megabits per second.
And that's only if you live close to the node.
Well, right.
And that's right up on the node 50. And so this means satellite and DSL effectively both no longer qualify as broadband. Okay, so really, the only two commercially available things that qualify as broadband are cable, for one, and fiber, for two. And while Atlanta, this isn't in the show notes, but Atlanta is being part of the new Google expansion. We're about to be a Google Fiber city. Just
Atlanta, Raleigh-Durham, and Phoenix. Charlotte?
Yeah. Several cities. Nashville was on that list too.
Nashville. That was the other one.
And it's just as I'm about to move away from Atlanta, which is fascinating. Just as I get close to, in one of the places I live, I'm 20 miles away from gigabit internet. I live currently in a city that's going to get gigabit internet, and I'm leaving to a city that doesn't have gigabit internet. This is terrible.
That will probably never have gigabit internet until it's the standard.
So here's my point. There are now only 2 commercially available products that count as broadband, really. Cable and fiber. So that's Google Fiber, Fios, AT&T Uverse. None of those are available in rural areas. Full stop. So what this means is the thing that no one wants to do, which is lay new cable.
Well,
it's
here's
not
a quote
like I don't have cable by choice, right? It's that it's not available. I have literally the fastest internet available to me, and that's Ringgold Telecom, who I like a lot as a company. They send me nice notes. Their service people are very friendly and on time. They're great as a company, but all they can offer me is DSL, and I'm not even that far from the node. But I get maybe 4 down, and if I'm lucky, 1 up. I barely met broadband off of the previous definition. Yeah, I get that now the definition's different, but we're still trapped in that thing that unless wireless with all of its, non-net neutral practices
Elon Musk is going to help us with this problem. Let's be serious.
Internet from space or whatever, but that's a long-term solution. I'm sorry.
Right.
It just is. I get that Elon Musk's a lovely pie-in-the-sky thinker, and it's cute. It really is. But come on, folks.
Project Loon.
None of those are reaching Ringgold anytime soon.
So, this is another quote from his statement, which is Chairman Wheeler, that is, quote, private industry continues to invest billions of dollars to expand America's broadband, $75 billion a year by one analysis.
Yes, but where is that investment taking place?
He did not say in his statement.
Right.
He also did not reference where his analysis was.
And so my point is yes, the vast swaths of America that currently don't have broadband, none of those are where the investment's happening. There is a digital divide in this country because there isn't money in putting true broadband in Ringgold, Georgia. Because how many people who live in Ringgold are really going to take advantage of it? Not that many. Me, some members of my congregation, many don't care. Right? And so this is my swath of rural America. Most of the folks don't care. But for those who do, and for the children of even those who don't, this digital divide is going to have a real impact, right? And you already see it in, people are shocked that I don't have satellite. The idea of being a cord cutter in Ringgold is insane. It's because I eke out enough online services. But for the idea of cord cutting, it's not even a deal. Because, how do you do it? The internet isn't fast enough. This digital divide is real, and this, without a commitment to actually force investment or whatever that looks like, these are just the parts that the market leaves out. These are gaps.
So at the end of his statement, he says, in June and December, the commission issued 2 Connect America Fund orders that will disperse $11 billion to support build-out to Americans in rural areas without broadband. And then he goes on to say that they're going to do other things like try to figure out the best way to do this. And they're also issuing a notice of inquiry seeking comment on additional ways to bring 25 megabit broadband to all Americans in a reasonable and timely fashion beyond what we have done to date.
Yes, those are beautiful words.
Yeah,
but they touch me in a very inappropriate place.
But it's the FCC. They can't actually do anything.
Yes, they can. It's the FCC that got telephone everywhere. You kidding me?
Well, short of requiring it.
Right. Well, they got telephone everywhere, right?
Right.
They can do it, right? But it's expensive and it's difficult. And it takes something like the FDR administration to actually make these kind of things happen. It's
true, actually.
You want to know why all these places have post offices and libraries? The new friggin' deal. That's why.
I think that the biggest thing to
electricity
remember,
too. The TV. I literally live in the TVA places, the Tennessee Valley Authority. I have members of my congregation who remember what it was like to be without electricity until TVA. Okay, the places that don't have broadband are the same places that were the last to electrify and the last to get the telephone. My older members of my congregation tell stories of going to the dry goods store to take a phone call. Now, let's think that the average American lifespan's 72 years, right? So these are people who were born during the New Deal, who still remember what it is to be without electricity and without telephone. This is going to be a much longer lag without some really drastic action.
Well, and the other thing to remember about what this means is think of how many times the ISPs use, but we're serving 94% of the nation with broadband.
No,
guess
what?
What?
Now you're not. Now you're
That's
serving
just dropped to
87%.
Yeah. No, it's additive. 13.1 plus 6.3. So it's about 20% is not being served by broadband. Excuse me. So as a talking point, that then becomes more interesting. And it makes it so that Congress and the FCC have, you're not serving 20%. It's not 5%, it's 20%.
Right.
And so I think that in that way, as a talking point for pundits, it'll be useful.
Well, I think it's going to be really interesting. So we'll end this discussion on this note. This is somewhat interesting because what this means is that the 20% that's now not served by broadband are predominantly Republican voters. Okay? It's true, right? It's
true, yeah.
It's predominantly Republican voters. And now we have Republicans owning both houses of Congress. So
get on it.
So it's interesting that in core Republican constituencies are the places without broadband. Now, the real question is, how much do they really care?
Yeah, that's true.
And speaking, go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to throw this quote in here from Jessica Workel, whatever, which I'm going to dub the Balmer of the FCC because she does not care. I also assume she does dances, like Balmer's dance specifically. In her statement, she said, quote, "But I, for one, am tired of dreaming small. It's time to dream big. This is the country that put a man on the moon. We invented the internet. Unlike Al Gore, they actually invented the internet. We can do audacious things if we set big goals. I think our new threshold should be 100 megabits,
which no one has.
I think anything short of that shortchanges our children, our future, and our digital economy.
Would make us as good as Korea
and Europe."
Well, some parts of Europe. I mean, other
industrialized parts of Europe.
Europe had the same problem we have in some ways. How do you lay cable on medieval cities? How do you do it?
Not northern Spain.
Right. Well, I mean, Europe is interesting to me because they are dealing in smaller territories, but they lagged a lot longer on internet rollout, and they had and may still have bandwidth caps on home internet that were crazy because of how hard it was to build out the internet infrastructure. Now, part of it is I think they did it later, and so they're able to lay better technologies rather than relying on copper wire for internet.
That's their biggest thing, that they have more of their internet was laid with cable or fiber originally, just because that's what they needed.
Right. Well, because they did it when that was
what they had. Yeah.
And we were, for so long reliant on 56K and then reliant on DSL, and then our cities got cable in the 80s. And so we just kind of piggybacked on that existing infrastructure. Europe has always been a predominantly satellite place. Cable wasn't really a thing. So when they finally did lay cable, it was good cable, and it got a lot of places. And, France is the size of Texas, right? So it's easier to roll out if your whole nation is the size of Texas and your whole continent is the size of like New England, right? Like you're playing a different game. So speaking of different games, Twitter, a service that I don't use the way they want me to, has launched two features that I don't want. Showing that they can capture the best ideas of the last 5 years in tech, Twitter is launching their own group messaging platform within Twitter, unlike Facebook, which makes everything a separate app. You'll be able to start a private direct chat room with people who follow you, even if they do not follow each other, like a chat room. Also, Twitter has added the ability to capture and edit 30-second videos for within their app, which they claim will not be a problem for their 6-second video platform, Vine.
Yeah,
It
no.
is apparently for entertainment, while 30-second videos are for news. Are any of these features actually exciting? Hell no. But it begs an interesting question. What is Twitter? No, really, what is Twitter?
A fire hose.
Nope. Now you have private chats and auto and videos. It's different. And now they have, these are features we've not bothered talking about because I'm not going to do every change that ever happens to Twitter.
Because we don't care.
Now they have like the most important, they have an algorithm figuring out the most important tweets for you to read while you were logged out. Which sounds
I have heard about that.
a lot more like Facebook. But then they're doing this, to be honest, weirdo video thing where it's like they had Vine, and Vine, now there are people who make their living on Vine, which is stupid. There are also people who make their living on Instagram, which is also stupid.
Because Facebook owns all of that intellectual property.
Right, but that's, so Vine was 6 seconds, and it turned into like this funny stop motion thing. And now,
No, yeah. Vine, I do actually really enjoy some Vine videos.
Sure. I mean, people can do creative things, especially when you set really good parameters, right? Good art often happens within weird parameters. Sometimes when you give people unlimited time, you get Tolstoy, and that's a problem. What good art sometimes needs is a very strict time limit. Think about Mad Men, right?
Right.
Mad Men has to do all of that with 42 minutes. I think that's part of the beauty of Mad Men and what prevents it from becoming Pride and Prejudice, which I also like, but admittedly goes on a bit. Even in video.
Yeah. I mean, I think the answer of what is Twitter is it is a landing place for people. They're just trying to get people to stay there.
Yeah.
And whether that means you're watching a 30-second video instead of a 6-second video, they're trying to become like AIM that bought a news channel.
They did. In fact, now that's how AOL makes most of its. That's what AOL is a company. It's owned blogging platforms, its own new media properties.
Exactly. So that's Twitter. That's what Twitter is going to become. And they're going to be bought by AOL.
I think the continued independent existence of Twitter is fascinating.
And,
right?
and how important it seems to be for pop culture.
And certainly how important it is for the news. I use it instead of a newspaper. I've just built my news feed in such a way that it's just a really good newspaper of things I'm interested in, plus the AP wires for things I'm not. Right, so I'm just kind of
all
aware
the
of the news.
TLDR information that you could want.
Right, and for me, I'm not actually reading tweets. I'm mostly reading articles that people have linked to in their tweets. That's like most.
That's
of
more
what I'm doing.
useful.
That's most of what I'm doing with it. That's why I said I don't use Twitter the way Twitter wants me to. And I don't have a big Twitter brand or a big Twitter following. Would that I did, perhaps, but I don't. And so maybe if I ever do, my thoughts on Twitter will be different. But I guess these are nice features. But I think about it in terms of, like, mission creep, right? You really want to get good at one thing. And then you need to figure out how to make money on one thing. And Twitter has this thing that they still have struggled to make money at, that they're really good at. And I don't even know how it stays relevant, but it does. But these kind of creeping in, and they experiment with music and all kinds of weird things, and all of these things seem to stray away from what Twitter actually is. I think in some ways, Facebook's genius by segmenting off its weird things into separate brands, right?
Like Instagram.
Or WhatsApp. Now,
they haven't pulled. But the important thing is with both Instagram and WhatsApp to a lesser extent, they haven't rolled Instagram fully into Facebook.
No, and I don't think they're going to.
Oh, I think they're going to leave it alone because people don't realize that Instagram is owned by Facebook, or they don't care.
Or they don't care because it still feels like a separate place. In some ways, I think this is Twitter's WhatsApp and Twitter's Instagram, but they
shoved
haven't
into the same thing.
shoved into Twitter. And I'm just not sure that the folks who are currently not using Twitter are going to this is going to bring them into using Twitter.
Right.
In some way, I've always thought Facebook's a little weird, but thinking of Facebook as a social media conglomerate, that actually has a future in a way that maybe Twitter doesn't.
Yeah. Well, and they own Oculus.
Oh, yeah. So the Oasis. Right.
Don't forget the Oasis.
So speaking of someone else who doesn't have much of a future, it's this week's Last Call.
This is a wannabe space story. Don't worry about it. So this past Monday, the Secret Service was given another scare when they discovered none other than a drone crashed into the trees on the ground of the White House. Who crashed it? What nefarious plot was afoot?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that it was just a government intelligence employee that, after consuming one too many adult beverages, took a friend's quadcopter for a spin and accidentally crashed it into the trees. So don't drink and drone, people.
Right.
I have to credit Tom Merritt for that one.
That actually might lead to like stricter rules about drone use in the district and all kinds of things.
President Obama was quoted as saying something along the lines of, yeah, because there's like no regulation currently.
Right. And so you may not. Yeah, it's just this one idiot may have ruined it for a lot of people. So don't do that.
Well, and the other thing is, when you hear the word drone, remember, it's model airplanes gone horribly awry.
It's model airplanes with GPS control.
That you can control off your smartphone now.
Right.
This was a particularly fancy one. If I remember correctly, it was a DJI Phantom.
Yeah, that sounds right. Whatever.
That's what it is. The article loaded right as I clicked on it.
Yeah.
Which is expensive.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean,
thousands of dollars, $1,000.
I mean, I was looking at drone pricing a while ago because I think it would be just great for filmmaking. To get these helicopter shots in countries that don't care, because obviously I can't do that in the United States; it's against the law. But I can in other countries. Right?
You've been editing too much recently. That's your problem.
Right, I've been editing too much recently, and I've been thinking how useful it would be if I had a helicopter shot as B-roll. Actually, I have a B-roll problem in my current big project, such that I sit around and fantasize of ways that I could get more B-roll. And a drone is one of those ways that I could have flown it over the community and really gotten some terrific. I mean, a drone shot of the Bañada would have been great.
Just call the NSA. Maybe they'll do a flyover for you.
Easy. Yeah. What's funny is the government's going to ban drones in the district, and the government has been flying drones in restricted airspace everywhere else in the world. So that the government.
There's a certain irony to this.
The irony of government drone restrictions is fascinating. And on that note, we should probably get out of here before we say something truly seditious. If you have any feedback for us, podcast at textlesscall.com, facebook.com/textlesscall, pinterest.com/textlesscall, or at textlesscall on the Twitters. However you find us, we'll be seeing you on the interwebs. Titles, The Irony of Government Drone Restrictions.
Yep.
The other one was Or Else You Get Tolstoy.